Intersection Magazine Podcast.
Welcome to Intersection Magazine Podcast. In this issue, we're basically going to summarize what we covered in the March 2025 issue of Intersection Magazine. That's Volume 9, Issue 8. What we covered was basically the completion of Farewell to Arms, an article published by John Carlin, written in 1997 and published by Word Magazine. This article is a conversation about new ideas, or it's really a predictive piece about what could happen in warfare in the ages to come, where weapons that were used traditionally were not going to be employed, but instead information was going to be at the heart of military operation. We also have a supplemental piece by Founders Freedom. We also covered NFX, a piece by NFX on the return of the customer, which is really focusing on certain ideas or trends that were taking place post, I think, 2010, 2014, and how these different ideas or trends influenced consumer behavior. We also have some notes from LinkedIn. This is a different take or piece that I've introduced, where I will talk about interesting conversations that are taking place on LinkedIn. There are two conversations we covered in the month of March: the mastery flow concept, and then the process of pre-money valuations of venture capital. That's what we covered in the month of March. Of course, we also have a book review. We have a movie recommendation. We have a micro poetry, which we believe you'll enjoy. Once again, thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. And we look forward to creating more useful content for you. Now, while the aim of the magazine is really to feature technology and innovation locally as well as regionally in the greater East African region, I'm also selfishly using the magazine to promote some of the projects that are under the Hope First Enterprise umbrella. One of those projects is pretty simple. What we try to do is we have a media function which takes care of web design, web hosting. We also have a training function which we believe is designed to help us teach others do what we have learned to do over the years. So under that you have the option of learning some basic web design, and then of course most people don't teach you that much about web hosting, but we do a little bit about it as well. What that means is we'll introduce you into how to monetize or how to capture two important pieces in the web development ecosystem, both the design and then of course the hosting. What you can have is a connection to a reseller. You become a reseller for space on different options, and then you charge your customers a certain fee. Then of course you pay off the hosting company for a certain fee. If you choose a right hosting partner, then they usually have access to 24/7 support, which you then use to support your customer or your client. In terms of design, we start from the very basics of what you see is what you get: editors, then to the use of content management systems which make use of databases. Then we go into the design using the three or the trio, which is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. The course should take, or the training should take maybe about 3 weeks, and that's probably about 2 or 3 hours a day continuously for a period of about 10 days. And advisably, you are to bring your own laptop, although we're working on a surprise project for those of you who sign up for this particular project or course. Now, in the final part of this farewell to arms, some discussions were taking place between consultants in security and those at the heart of the Washington-based system, talking about different partners or players in the ecosystem that exist, whether they're hardware people or software developers, and what it means to engage in war of a different kind. Where now we were talking about how wars were going to be fought with information. I think the article is interesting because it really predates the age that was coming where computers were going to be mass adopted, and then of course where the internet itself was going to become a major player, was going to play a major role in the governments and in how people communicated. So these are some issues that were tackled between, for example, the FBI, the NSA, and the CIA. These conversations were really about national security. Now, interestingly, if you look at the history of the internet, it comes down to DARPA, the defense agency in the US that actually created it to serve US defense interests. But I suppose it's natural that at some point the interest relating to security and to the complexities that would arise out of this system had to be discussed, and maybe came from the same people who created the system. So those are actually some conversations that he covered in this final piece, and you're free to read it on your own to find out a little bit more. Also some discussions about how different militaries deal with crime. For example, there's a suggestion that in these times countries were going to outsource warfare to criminal organizations, or criminal organizations themselves were becoming transnational. We've had some many countries, for example, in South America, begin to think of transforming or renaming or classifying old school drug cartels into terrorism organizations because of just the vast size of the people that are involved in this drug operations and the massive regional impact of these cartels, for example. Then also we see the rise of, for example, military contractors who operate beyond geographies where they can be called on to engage these different groups. But of course, the importance of information in all this kind of warfare cannot be understated. I suppose another interesting thing that comes into this discussion is the Cold War, and how for a long time it seemed as though you just had the U.S. Playing against Russia, and now you're seeing new powers rising, and how, for example, resources are becoming central in the subject of warfare, the control of oil, the control of water, who gets to build which dams, how the effect of just a simple weapon could change the course of a whole battle. Nowadays, for example, we see that the existence or the use of or the ability just to have nuclear weapons places countries or brings countries to a level of negotiation with other countries that nothing else can. In addition to, of course, the ability to make use of these weapons is the ability to use hackers to involve themselves in electronic crime and cybercrime to help move large amounts of money. So a technology, for example, that has been created to help make business easier or make transfer of money faster, or maybe transform the very meaning of money, is now being used because of its security features to hide and to conceal those who may not necessarily be interested in staying on the right side of the law. Those are just a few small ideas that exist in this piece, but it's interesting how something written all those years ago, over 30 years ago, can have so much relevance and can have so much of a prophetic effect on how we think and how we do warfare. As before, we have a section from Founders Freedom, which you're free to explore. Contact them through their LinkedIn. The two principals at Founders Freedom have active pages which you can use to communicate with them for their services, as well as a number that you can call and a website that you can visit for more information. We also have some publications that are available for those who need to communicate better, as well as those who need to navigate the space where some technical terms are used. I've found this material very useful on a personal level for conversations with people of influence. We've also given you the option of advertising with us, whether that's on our websites or on our socials, and then of course the option of subscribing to the magazine. For those of you who are interested in collaborating with us on the podcast, as we've stated before, you can advertise with us, you can collaborate on the sponsorship over season, which is 3 months, 12 episodes. The advantage of this method of collaboration or sponsorship over season is you get your message out and you establish yourself as a partner or as a leading voice or as an expert or as the go-to organization around a certain topic. So no matter who we are interviewing for those 3 months, your voice will be heard on either in short form or in a one-to-one interview featuring your organization. For those who are interested in advertising the magazine, our costs are also shown and displayed. We have recently introduced the Transition, Transformation, and Radical Thinking podcast. That one is related to those who are interested in spiritual ideas, trying to navigate the space or trying to navigate life with the complexities of life and the ideas that will be surrounding you as you make choices as you move through different stages in your life, whether you're moving from university to work, from high school to university, from singleness or singlehood to marriage, or giving birth, divorce. All sorts of ideas are part of what we cover in transition, transformation, and radical thinking. We also have put together a list of some of our web design costs for those of you who are interested in this, from simple to complex sites, and then of course the costs for the domain, search engine optimization, administration, and email creation. We've also given you a look into our philosophy in terms of how we think around the subject of doing our work. The piece that was written is a continuation of some of the useful material we found from NFX. As a subscriber to their newsletter, I come across interesting pieces that I often want to share with those who are in the same space. The article is featured "The Consumer is Back." Starts off describing some of the major consumer internet unicorns from 1993 to 2023, which was, of course, your Amazons, your eBays, your Googles, your PayPals, your LinkedIns, your Facebooks, your Spotifys, your Ubers. That's around 2009. Then with the emergence of cryptocurrencies, you see your Coinbases, your Robinhoods, later on your TikToks. That's coming a little bit later, missing in a sense, or coming after what should have been the boom in social. Then you've got your Discords, DoorDash, a few others later on. So the article just seeks to help us identify technology windows, for example. Why was what was so big about Amazon and eBay in 1995, 1997? Books and online sales. Interestingly as well, of course, naturally, PayPal comes around right after Amazon and eBay. So sometimes different businesses are established based on the needs that are existing in that current time. LinkedIn comes in a little bit earlier in 2001, later on Facebook. So the desire to connect with people in a professional level seems to precede the desire to connect with people on a social level, which is with Facebook. But if you have a look at some of what prompted the establishment of Facebook, was, at least from what I've listened to with groups like Acquired, with a podcast like Acquired, is Facebook was really established around universities who wanted to make sure that the users were authenticated, that these were actually people at the university, or even when they went into schools, that these were actually students that were registered at the school. Later on, of course, and this was after, I believe, after people like Napster that were trying to bring together, create, I suppose, a democratic space for music sharing. Spotify emerges after that, and after a period of time when the regulators had pushed groups like Napster and some of the other music sharing platforms out of the picture. 2009, you have mobility coming into play, so maybe the Ubers emerge, an era of mobility, but as well as, of course, probably ideas around artificial intelligence and data, are being pursued. So maybe further or later iterations of Uber will involve autonomous driving. So a lot of this, and a lot of what was happening in history helps you understand why the environment was favorable and or allowed these unicorns to flourish or to emerge. And there's a discussion, as I said before, on technology windows. Technology windows are actually a discussion about the relationship between established business or incumbents and those who come in to attempt to take their space or to set themselves up as the next big thing. These discussions about the back and forth between incumbents and businesses that are trying to come in will be featured in other podcasts, but I think it's really important to find out a little bit more about the relationship between incumbents and businesses that may prove to be a threat. There's also some interesting conversation about what they call the closing of the consumer software window. I found some interesting conversations as well about how hardware hasn't changed much since 2008 to 2024. They basically compared the phones and the computers, because they all have monitors, they have some kind of hard disk, as well as, of course, the keyboard. That hasn't changed much since 1994 to 2024 for the computer, 2008 to 2024 for the phone. This is really interesting if you look at the image that they put together for that. The rest of the ideas you can look at on your own. We also, in our movie section, compared the discussion of leadership as expressed in both Succession and Billions. We also featured a piece on business diplomacy. I need to correct that in the magazine because the title says investment facilitation, but it should say business diplomacy, so I need to correct that. Anyhow, business diplomacy covers many areas. I'll give you the summary from the chapters: an introduction, the foundations, the role of diplomacy negotiations, stakeholder management. Of course, that means identifying who the different stakeholders are, leveraging diplomatic networks for business growth, a conflict resolution section, high-stake deals, cross-cultural communication is a must-have, public relations in business diplomacy, economic diplomacy, the role of soft power, navigating diplomatic protocol, the future of business diplomacy, and a conversation about some case studies around the same subject. We have, as usual, the 4 issues of the magazine that we've covered in the last 4 months prior to the date. And then I suppose we put together the system design cheat sheet. This, I think, was also repeated from last month. Interestingly, I think this is a useful tool for those of you who are interested in what different parts, or if you're interested in what different programs or software suites to pursue and where you fall in the bigger picture of system design. If you're into networking, maybe security, what kind of devices are you going to be dealing with? If you're into databases, what kind of programs should you learn? Are you going to go into Google Cloud Storage? Are you going to use Azure? If you're into compute, what are containers? What are servers? Are you going to use virtual machines? What are virtual private networks in networking? What are gateways? What are network address translators or translation? A lot of that stuff you might find useful. Then in the notes section, notes from LinkedIn, we featured a VC analyst and startup analyst, as well as a Web3 enthusiast, talking about the different steps in the process of pre-money evaluations. Are you assessing the startup stage and market? That's the first step. The second step, are you analyzing financials and metrics? The third step is comparing similar companies. Then you determine the risk factors. Then you calculate the pre-money valuation. Then you negotiate your terms and equity. Then you close the investment round. Now, we featured before startup or founder metrics, metrics that help you decide, for example, business effectiveness or startup worthiness and all sorts of other ideas. But it's interesting because an organization is a living organism, and sometimes to break it down to metrics can be a bit too simplistic. Nonetheless, the metrics are a useful way of getting some way of creating some check boxes, but implementing metrics can be really tricky. Of course, this can be discussed at a later stage, but I suppose as a person who has some obsession with metrics, it's a word of caution. The piece that was put together on Mastery Flow was created by an author on LinkedIn whose contact I've shared. He's a fashion designer. You will find his material very useful. He talks about foundation building or basic concepts, skill development as a second part, deepening understanding as a third part, mastery demonstration as a fourth part, and then continuous improvement as the fifth part. My micro poetry for the month is called March Oak Roll. We also share some updates in terms of how we have stood so far. I've shared with you an image from baking cups. Incidentally, these baking cups come in batches of 1,000. And what that means is we have put together, or at least baked 1,000 plus cakes since we started, which is a major milestone. So once again, thank you for those of you who have supported us. Hope First Bakery is available to provide your basic catering, so please get in touch with us in that regard. Once again, thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. We hope you find this material useful. If audio is a way you consume material, then I hope this is a useful tool for you. If not, please feel free to subscribe. We think that $24 for a year is a really reasonable cost for those of you who want to receive the magazine in your socials. That's your WhatsApp or your Telegram. So, as I've said before, thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing.
Intersection Magazine Podcast.